Right, today we're gonna do something different. You know how this channel started? Probably not, but initially it started with a friend and I wishing to post their essays. In particular, a person wished to post their essays, and I figured I'd join in too. Now, this time I'm actually gonna read an essay I recently wrote. It was in reference to a discussion I had in ethics class, and I figured I might as well share it. So allow me to read Ethics in Relation to the State and Its Actions, and I can elaborate further. I want you to imagine a map. Look down at it. On the map is the United States, territories and all. That is over 300 million lives the state which rules this land is responsible for. Now, it is quite common when the subject comes up for people to argue ethics. Some argue that the state should help people, just as any private citizen should, for it is moral. Others instead make the claim that the state should act to do the most to further good ends, so that as many people as possible can benefit. There are other positions, of course, but these two are of particular note. But can the state truly obey such ethical stances in practice? That is what is to be examined through three parts: how the state gets its resources to do these actions, the position of the state, and the distinction between the state and the private citizen. The state needs resources in order to do anything. Roads do not build themselves, armies do not equip themselves, and social programs do not fund themselves. The state, in order to achieve whatever ends it sets out to do, needs resources. But how does the state raise the capital to afford its projects? The state can use several methods, but in the modern era, taxation, borrowing, and devaluing of currency are the most common. Taxes and tariffs, which are themselves a form of taxation, are levies the state takes from an individual or business. They are compulsory, which means you must pay them or face punishment. Is this moral, though? No, it is not. One may balk at such an assertion. However, a forced seizure of one's personal property is stealing. It is, by every definition, theft. One may argue that because we consent to a government, that we consent to taxation. But that is not the case. Consent merely makes things easier. It is entirely optional as far as taxation is concerned. That means that, in order to fund any moral enterprise of the state, an immoral theft of the property of millions must be committed. What about borrowing, then, taking on debt? In order to pay debts, another method of raising income must be used, and so the same problem exists as with taxation. It is, however, compounded with the devaluation of the currency in question, leading to inflation. Let us then talk about that devaluation. To devalue a currency is to make it worth less, thus increasing the price of goods by comparison. This too is immoral, as it devalues the assets of others. It makes them less able to afford goods, and so the real value of what they possess goes down. The effect is similar to the theft of an equivalent value occurred to an individual, so it is again immoral, following any firm moral standpoint. Theft is, whether we like it or not, going by deontology, either right or wrong. In deontology, a necessary wrong cannot exist, and so the state cannot fund itself while following pure moral ethics. The state itself is therefore a violator of such ethics for continually existing through these methods, with no moral way to transition out of such a position. The existence of the state thus becomes a crime against morality itself. Deontology thus cannot justify the existence of a state. It is a necessary evil, and from this fact can only be justified from a form of consequentialist, utilitarian, or social contract-based ethics. The truth of the state's funding is that, as it stands, the state must steal or die. The state has a very precarious position. It must make decisions on behalf of a larger group and manage territory so large in scale that it's truly hard to comprehend. To put into perspective, if you carved up the United States land area, you could give 1,000,000 square miles to each citizen of the United States and still have more left over. All of this has to be managed, taxes collected, a budget organized and spent, and law enforced. Fundamentally, the state must fulfill its role as the one making laws, enforcing laws, and reviewing laws to make sure they fit within its constitution. If it fails to, then many lives will suffer or even be lost. The state is not in a particularly good position to be moral or charitable. This is especially true when you factor in foreign policy. Sure, even on an individual level there will be bad actors. Those who violate the rights, privileges, and or morals of others will always exist. However, the state failing to respond appropriately to these bad actors or showing weakness is likely to be used against it. That makes the state unable to do what it wants. since it is being taken advantage of by others. Limited resources compounds this problem and makes the state's decisions one of the largest collections of tough choices to exist. As much as we may wish it, if you're looking for easy choices, the state shouldn't be where you look. You're just wasting your time. The state is not like a private individual. A private person has little overhead for their kind actions. They can work and choose to donate their profits to helping another, or they could contribute their time and effort instead. The state doesn't get that option. The money isn't theirs to give. It is a forced levy, or put bluntly, stolen wealth. They like the precariousness of the state when it comes to their position as well. If a person refuses to use weapons, then others can come in to save them. There's no one to save the state when mobilization hits. The state is also heavily bureaucratic, making it run more slowly and inefficiently. Given these notable differences, the state cannot run on a deontological model. The model is fundamentally incompatible with the situation of the state. It has to turn back to utilitarian, consequentialist, or social contract beliefs. The only other conclusion is to abolish the state itself, and that is not a feasible path forward for several reasons. Therefore, the only conclusion to be reached, honestly, is that to preserve the state, it appears I misspelled that. Apologies. To preserve the state, a model focused not on right or wrong, but efficient management is necessary. When it comes to ethics, the individual and the state are different. You can try to deny the truth of the state and its fundamental ethics, but that will prove itself to be fruitless and arguably immoral as an endeavor. To lie about the reality of the world is to bear false witness in function. You are lying to yourself and the divine, whatever one exists, about the truth of the world. Therefore, to maintain a truly moral stance, you must accept the truths of the world, warts and all. Speaking for myself, I would love if everyone could embrace right and wrong and behave in a moral manner. That would be truly lovely. That is not the world we live in, and so adaptations must be made to align with the world itself. To choose otherwise is tantamount to destruction. If you seek to push for things that would be moral for the average person to support, but are logistically challenging or impossible to execute, then you will see increases in levies, taxes, and debt, greater strain on everybody, and you likely will not even achieve the goal you set out to achieve. It is essentially breaking one's own back without achieving anything other than feeling good. That isn't even martyrdom. That's suicidal. Kant's views, Immanuel Kant, cannot effectively be applied to the state. Whether we like it or not, it is best to make plans within that reality in which we live. Remember what I said at the beginning. Over 300 million lives are on the line. The scale tips, lives are lost, and time moves forwards. There is no way we can afford needless losses. So either accept the reality, or back out of pushing for policy. That's the best thing you can do, really. Let those willing to accept disgracing themselves for immorality pay the price required to continue the necessary evil to do so. Now, there's a few things to elaborate on there. Number one, as stated, taxation is, by definition, theft. You may not like it, but it is. You may argue, okay, well, I choose to live in this country and take its benefits, therefore it's not theft. But no, because you don't really get the choice. Think about it for a second. Unless you're super rich, you can't just fly out of the country whenever you want. You pay money on sales before you leave the country, even if you've never worked a day in your life. If you go to a place with a sales tax, you've already paid a tax for existing in an area. And I should need to remind people that moving isn't always the easiest thing. Especially to another country where you need to immigrate, fill out the paperwork, and do a bunch of things. You can't just, boom, overnight, leave the country. And even if you do enjoy those privileges of being in the state, say the roads, the schools, the hospitals, did you choose to build them? No. In fact, in the case of primary schooling, it's compulsory, so you don't even get a choice there. And so you can't say, oh yes, I built these things to improve my country because I thought it would be more efficient, therefore you owe me money. That doesn't make any sense, especially considering we're forced into the system. And so it's a forced levy, which means it is theft, and you don't have the ability to leave before you get taxed. Unless, of course, again, you're really rich. Which kind of defeats the argument, because we're looking at everybody. And then there's just the reality of we can't really hold a firm moral position when it comes to the state. Unless, like my plan would entail, we get rid of taxation and find a way to fund the state without theft, but through investment, we will fundamentally always be dealing with a state that must minimize harm. Harm's already being committed. There is no question. It's about how much and how do we minimize that harm? How do we reduce it? How do we reduce the immoral actions being carried out by the state, individuals, or groups? That is the state's role. And so the state does need to take a standpoint of most good for the common people, most pleasure, or what is it that everyone has agreed to through a social contract, which, if we're being honest, not everyone has agreed to, just enough people that we say, yep, that's a thing. Social contract theory is full of nonsense, but it's still a thing that the state could use as an argument. Hey, we agreed to these principles early on, keep following them, and we'll be good. At least that's something, and you know where the state stands. But the state cannot make a position purely on, this is right, this is wrong. It's either, does this benefit people? Does it not? Is slavery beneficial? No, get rid of it. That is what is right. Does taking this action prevent deaths? Yes, then it is correct. Does this action help people? No, then it is wrong. Don't do it. So on and so forth with every decision ever made. That is fundamentally how the state operates. We may not like it. We may say the state should operate morally, but it is not in the position to do so. It is using money it doesn't have. So rephrase, using money it doesn't own to do things it doesn't have the authority to, because it deems it a thing that it should do. Fundamentally, it's already overstretching itself through most of its actions. One can make arguments of, okay, it owes certain people who fight for it, in the same way you would owe your boss, or their boss owes you, because you did something for them or they did something for you. But you cannot make the argument of, well, it owes everybody, because it really doesn't. Other than, actually getting rid of taxation eventually instead of just taking taxes and then not using them for anything productive. As you do. And so the state, again, faces the reality that it is simply weighing lives. The state is not in a position to make a purely moral stance. It never has. And so it must say, all right, how do I help the most people? This is how, this is what we do then. The state is not a moral entity. It is a government. It is best we don't mix those up. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.